Welcome back, new viewers and game bears. It is time for a new episode of Unused Content in Games, and this time we have Pokemon Trading Card Game on the Game Boy Color, or just Game Boy, whichever. So, starting off with debugging material, let us begin. Leftover functions used to test out various things, but before we truly begin, if you enjoy this type of content at any point in the video, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's free and you can always change your mind later so you don't miss out on any more unused content in games. So, let us truly begin with starting up debug menu. A startup debug menu, which can be accessed by using the following codes. This code right over here you can see depending on your version of the game. Since the European versions are multi-language, you will have to either have a save game with the language set, or you will have to skip the menu the first time around. Otherwise it will display kanji gibberish, as the game doesn't default to any language when confronted with an invalid language setting. It's notable that regardless of the version, all options of this menu have been translated. Here's a closer look at that for the US code version. And here's the European version. God dang it. Alright, there we go. Alright, power on. This will boot up the game as usual. Dual mode. This switches between the two dual modes, normal, dual, and skip. Alright, continue from diary. The skip option skips the title screen and directly puts you to where you last saved. If there isn't save game, it will start you from the beginning. And CGB test. This one is gone for good. It was stubbed out and now called a single ret in the code most likely. Judging from its name, this option was likely there to test various color features. So this is all most likely just testing to make sure the buttons work, make sure the dual mode works, and the save feature works. Alright, SGB frames. Alright, loads a normally unseen border, which was likely used as either a test or a template. Selecting this option again will cycle through the game's various other SGB borders. In order, those are the test frames, the title frame, the in-game frame, the post-game frame, and the loops back to the test one, and then loops back. Alternatively, the Game Genie code, this code right here, can be used to load the unused border at startup. And here's a closer look at this, most likely to test the colors on the Game Boy Color. Alright, standard VG character. This will show VG tiles, this code right here, on the screen. If the credits option was selected prior, then the Hall of Honors tile set will also be displayed, as it is the last map to be loaded in that sequence. If the deck border builder was used prior, then the various card graphics will be shown instead. This option is exclusive to the US version and is replaced by language in the European version. Here's a closer look. All that with the different characters you can put in, description for one of the cards it looks like, the different Pokemon card symbols, and status effects even too, and a bunch of other textures. Alright, language. It will show the standard language menu, either in English, German, French, or English, Spanish, Italian, depending on the version of the game. This option is exclusive to the European version, replacing standard BG characters. I look at SPR_16, and for some reason, Courtney's in-game sprite. This option will open a character sprite viewer, most likely to just test how the different sprites look. And I guess Courtney was their test subject. Seems like the devs really liked someone in the game. 3 guesses as to who. Anyways. No, I don't blame them. But anyways. Controls. A. Change the direction faced by the currently displayed sprite. Left and right. Scroll forward and backwards. Up and down. Scroll forward and backwards by an increment of 10, which is quite a bit actually in terms of tile sets. Select. Exit the menu. 5. Effects or VFX. This test is also gone. Calling a single ret. Judging from the name, this option is likely testing HDMA effects or vertical windowing effects as used in the credits. Alright, create booster packs with the Colosseum Evolution Mystery and Laboratory and Energy packs that you can get in the game. Likely just testing how many of those you can get into the randomizer for the cards you get works. Alright, this menu allows one to generate random 10 card booster packs. This was likely done to check if the random seed tables were correct and correct sets of cards were generated. The number on the side windows are, in part, used to define what type of the soul energy card for each set will be. From the energy option, each number except the last one will produce 2 sets of 5 cards, each of a separate given type. And here's a closer look at this little table we got over here. You can choose 1 booster pack or up to 7, it seems. Get 70 in one go, imagine that. Probably through hacking you could do that in the final game. If it's still in the code, that is, and it likely is. Alright, and here's the different tables that we see over here for the different booster packs. I'll let you all read that for a sec. Alright, credits. Displays the credits. Simple as that. Gee, I would have never guessed, good sir. I quit. This option will quit the menu. If the menu was called from the boot up code, it will reboot the game and then display this menu again. Else it works as expected. Alright, in-game debug menu. As you can see, a little debug menu over here. Leftovers from my field debug menu that was accessed from the pause menu, while the menu at 0443D2 was dummied out before release, as evident by a single ret code. At least the look of it can be recovered by using the following Game Genie codes, and you can see these codes over here. I'll stop for a second so y'all can read it if you want. Alright, here's a closer look at the debug option. Alright, coordinating debug options. Function 1C003 is an option which isn't part of any debug menu found in the retail game. When selected, press A plus B will print the player's current XY coordinates on screen, as you can see right over here. These values will not update in real time, and only render in increments of 2. This option also has codes to load the test color palette, just testing the different colors on the game. For the Game Boy Color, screen by pressing A, though this doesn't seem to work. Presumably it would have loaded the palettes dynamically in the top left corner of the screen. Excuse me, that was a mistake. Alright, tile map debug options. Function 1C866 is another stray debug option. This one dealing with HSCX and HSCY, which are 2 registers that control the scrolling of the background tile maps. Here, using the D-pad would have adjusted these 2 registers. I can't read. With the scrolling speed of the background being increased while holding down the B button. This was likely used to test out the ending credits sequence, and here's a closer look at that debug option with the coordinates of 14 by 10. Alright, now this segment is done. Onward to unused graphics, bootleg models, and a good amount of unused font characters. Alright, unused font characters. You see the various fonts over here. Oddly enough, the Japanese version contains a half with fonts from the Latin alphabet, despite there not being any use for it. Compared to its international counterpart, the characters are all more vertically squished, and the gender symbols are instead a $sign and a percentage sign. I would have liked the $sign, not gonna lie, but whatever. In the Japanese version, full width gender symbols are used for the Nidoran line. Meanwhile, the multiplication symbols is an asterisk, the and is completely different, and more of the comma is visible. As for the E accent, the lowercase one is missing, and the capital one is instead a slightly different and sign. And here's what that looks like. The game's international font is based on ASCII-2 encoding, which explains why some very specific tiles are present but never used. These tiles are found in both the US and the EU font set, and that's what this looks like. Yeah, I thought that would look a little small, so here's a closer look at those. Alright, lowercase letters alongside a couple extra ASCII-2 characters, all but the E were blanked in the European version. Here's a closer look at that. Alright, full width lowercase letters from the same font set, as the ones primarily used by the player naming screen. Only the letters G and M are used. Due to the Japanese and European versions using the metric system, the game's sequel makes use of these characters, as the ability to choose lowercase Latin characters was added into the naming screen. Closer look at this. Unused full-width characters. Some have used half-width counterparts, while others just don't really fit anywhere. Namely, money never comes into play in this game, unlike in mainline entries, and Celsius is always spelt out in full instead of being abbreviated. The game's sequel makes use of the @ asterisk, angular brackets, equal semicolons, and underscore in its unupdated naming screen. Here's a closer look at that. Alright, unused card icons are found among the graphics of the dual icons. This sprite of a card facing up. Cards are only ever seen facing down, so there's not really any need for this icon. Here's a closer look at that. Yeah, unlike in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's no reason to have that, so I'm kind of glad they scrapped this, since we don't have face down cards in this game. Alright, Dive Bomb's animation is slightly broken from the Moltres card, by the way, leaving out one of the Fire Blast tiles to go unused. The only unused tile out of all the attack animations for that matter. Here's a closer look at, I guess, a part of its wing, which looks a little funny. I don't know. Alright, here's a closer look at the in-game model of it that's fully finished. That does look slightly erroneous in terms of its animation. Almost like one of them plays a frame faster than the other. And here's the fixed one, which now plays simultaneously, though they look more like sand pillars than like fire, in my opinion, but that's just sprite limitations at the time. Alright, unused overworld sprite. Worth noting is that the clerk's NPC back sprites can be seen in-game. As in SGB mode, one of the lounging clerks has their back to you, to show that the gift center can't be used. However, this sprite goes unused in the Virtual Console re-releases on the 3DS and on Switch, with NSO, which can only be played in the GBC mode. Alright, Amy, the water-type club master. Alright, Amy spends most of her time lounging on her deck chair, which looks a little funny in-game, but whatever. Only stepping out once to battle the player. Afterwards, she immediately snaps back to lying down, so the player never gets a chance to talk to her from the side. Moreover, you wouldn't even be able to talk to her from the back, as she stands in front of a wall. Unless you do walk through wall glitches, which I doubt this game has, you're unable to see that. The game's sequel makes use of the most of these sprites, as Amy can appear as one of the Grandmaster Cup challengers. Only her walking north frames remain unused, though her static back sprite can be seen if one happens to lose against her on the last round. Alright, here's a closer look at her unused sprites. Just her standing in various different directions. And here's animated sprites of her walking. Or walking in places. This game does have that a lot, too. Alright, Steve. Not Minecraft Steve. Just this guy named Steve. I think he was one of the Grandmasters, yeah. Even after beating all Grandmasters, Steve can't ever be talked to from the back, as he stands in front of Courtney. The game's sequel makes use of these sprites, as their Steve can be talked to from more angles, and here's a closer look at that. Also, seriously, Steve, they couldn't have thought of a better name for this guy? Whatever. I got one, Joseph. Wait, that's not much better, is it? Oh, whatever. Alright, unused flames animation. Fire. A completely unused overworld sprite, which is an object version of the flame from the Fire Club torches. Animated tiles are used instead, since as is, the Game Boy will struggle rendering so many objects on screen at once between the player, the fire, and the NPCs. Here's a closer look at this. I kind of like the way these little fire sprites look. Alright, here's a closer look at the animated one. Alright, more unused tile sets. Worth noting is that tile set 0D, Challenge Hall, also has unused tiles, though they won't be discussed in detail since they are merely leftovers from the Japanese version's Cup Challenge sign. Which, why don't we take a look at that real fast? Here's a closer look at some of these. Alright, so we got a few of those. Well, we'll get back to that momentarily. The tile sets there by all club entrances, has a handful of metal emblems, tiles which never get used. It's fairly easy to know what goes where by cross-referencing the lobby models with the ones from the status screen. Alright, here's a closer look at these tile sets. With them all mashed up together and decolored as well. They're all gray, black, and white. Alright, here's another unused tile. Probably could have been used for maybe the fire one. I don't know. It's a bit of a muted out reddish color. Yeah, I don't think so. After what I just said, yeah, never mind. No way. Alright, here's a closer look at the normal ones that are seen in-game. And here's some mock-up ones. The only difference I've really noticed between this one and the real ones is that the yellow one for the lightning symbol looks a little brighter in this one than it does here. It's very unnoticeable, honestly. Alright, tile set 7, or 07. The Water Club tile set contains some unused greenery tiles. These seem to have been designed with GBC modes in mind, whereas the final game simply reuses the corresponding SGB tiles. Moreover, one of the tiles uses the wrong palette, causing the grass to be wrong shades of green. Honestly, that's a pretty nice shade of green in my opinion, but here's a closer look. Tile set 08. The Lightning Club tile sets have unused tiles from the main stage spotlight effects. They look like they were intended to fill the spot occupied by two small machines with flickering lights, or flickering tights. Here's a closer look. Flickering tights. Just in case it sounded like I said something else. Alright, tile set 10. Besides an early stair tile, the Hall of Honor tile sets also has unused graphics from the legendary auto deck machine with its screen turned off. Here's a closer look at those. Alright, just a closer look at the normal version with that little TV on in the background. And here's a mock-up version without the TV on. Alright, next up, let's look at that little Japanese Challenge Cup thing that we saw before. Alright, going right back up here. Our regional differences. The Super Game Boy border. The Japanese initial SGB, which I guess that's what it stands for, Super Game Boy. Took me a bit to realize that, excuse me. Border has written on the Pokeball outlines, which matches the similar outlines used in the version's tile screens. This writing was removed from the international releases. Here's a closer look at that. And here's the one without the text. Alright, intro booster packs. The booster that appears during the intro were changed outside of Japan to reflect the appearance of those distributed internationally. Alright, here's a closer look at all of these ones. You know what? It would take too long to just click all of them individually, so here's a closer look at all of them on here. Honestly, I kind of like the more colored in ones more. They look better. Alright, title screen. The international title screen was changed radically, being made more simple, while the copyright info was streamlined. Here's a closer look at that. Alright, the Game Boy graphics. The Game Boy scene when using the Game Boy's various link features has this graphic refined in the international versions. Alright, all those are going to take too long to click on, so I'll just show it from here. Alright, card backgrounds. The back of the cards was changed outside of Japan to reflect the appearance of the cards distributed abroad. And here's a closer look at that. I think I prefer the ones we have in the international version, though this one looks fine, but ours has a bit more expression to it, if you will. I like just the way this one looks more. Card close-ups. The Pokemon label on the card close-up was changed to Pokemon. So it's just the E's lowercase with the accent on it. Internationally, to match the casing used in the mainline games at the time. Here's a close look at that. This all little Goldeen card. I mean, you could have had a capital E with the accent, but whatever. Alright, paralyzed symbol. The status icon used for paralyzed Pokemon was changed internationally to a thick horizontal jagged line. Honestly, the Japanese one looks better and just looks cleaner. Due to the original icon having an unfortunate resemblance to a... I'm not going to say that emblem. Because I feel like if I say that, I'm going to get flagged. Alright, here's a closer look at this. And the one we have in the international versions, which looks really blurry. They could have made that look a little cleaner. But whatevs. Alright, once again, Jinx censorship. Jinx's skin was changed from black to purple to match its international base set card art, for obvious reasons, we all know why. Here's a closer look. And here's the international version. Alright, Challenge Hall. The writing on the Challenge Hall side was translated to English. Here's a closer look at the Japanese one. And here's the English one. Pokemon TCG Challenge Cup. Alright, Ninetales. In the US version, both Ninetales cards incorrectly spell his name as Ninetales. You know, like tails instead of a fairy tale. The European version corrected this. Here's a closer look. Oddly, the description of base set Ninetales Fire Blast does spell his name correctly in the US version, and here's a closer look at that. Even though the name is still spelled incorrectly, but whatever. Card behaviors. The Japanese version does not allow one to flip freely through a card's page. You can only go forward, and you do so by pressing A. The localization made it so that you flip forward and back through each page with the D-pad. Doing so also makes the pages loop, whereas reaching the last page of a card by pressing A returns you to the card list screen. Almost as a trade-off for its quality of life change, the localization version removes the reference mark, whatever that symbol is, next to attacks with special effects. This is especially odd, as the symbol is still used during duels. Now just not when checking a card's description. Infrared communication. The Japanese version contains infrared hardware inside the cartridge, enabling compatibility between different Game Boy models. International versions remove this, and require the Game Boy Color's built-in sensor. Alright, and virtual console changes, general, due to card pop being unsupported, a bookcase in Ishihara's house cannot be interacted with, as it refers to the phantom cards one can obtain from using card pop. Despite this, Dr. Mason's first email, which explains the process behind card pop, was left completely untouched. It's impossible to interact with the clerks in each club lounges. This is due to the game disabling battle mode and trade mode, as all card link cable features are neither supported nor emulated. For whatever reason, they could have done that, but no. As the Game Boy printer cannot be used, the print function of the PC has been disabled. The only change that is directly mentioned in the manual of the game. And finally, Jinx. Once again, while the original international release already changed Jinx's color from black to purple, the Virtual Console re-release chose to further lighten it. This reflects an identical change done in between the base set and base set 2 printings of the card's real-life equivalents. Here's a closer look at this. Alright, finally, Nintendo Switch Online changes. Unlike the 3DS Virtual Console release, infrared communication is supported, making it possible to use Card Pop, and thus obtain the Phantom cards. This version also has native Link support, letting one use Battle Mode and Charade Mode. However, the Print PC option is still disabled. Jinx uses its lighter palette from the 3DS Virtual Console version, and the game is once again locked into Game Boy Color mode. Alright, now let's go back. Alright, let's look at unused text next. This will be the last part of part 1 for a bit. Alright, a block of unused system strings, some of which being placeholders, and others possible leftovers of dummied out dialog options. And here's a close look at all that. I'll stop right here just so y'all can read it. Just pause if you ever need to at some point. Alright. We already looked at version differences. Yes, we did. Alright, well, that being said, we're going to save these last parts over here for a quick part 2 in the next episode. So, thank you all for watching this edition of Unused Content in Games. If you all enjoyed this and you want to see more, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And consider answering the question today, as usual, of all the unused content we went over, what would you have liked to see in the final game and why? I guess, for unused graphics, I guess some of these unused walking animations would have been pretty neat, as well as some of these unused tile sets. But next episode, we'll finish off with the rest of what's down here. So, thank you all for watching, and have a berrific day.